Hey folks, Steve here with another World in Flames instructional video covering Naval Mechanics. I firstly want to apologize. The last video had some issues with it that I didn't catch when I uploaded it. Apparently, 20 minutes in, the visual aspect of the video stops and you're only getting my voice as I kind of describe some movement, naval movement stuff. So I'm going to try to spend the first few minutes of this video kind of showing what I was trying to show there. It's pretty straightforward stuff, so I won't spend too much time with it. I think the issue came up somehow with my video editing software in Vassal, and there's just something that went wrong with compiling the video. So that's why for this video, I'm not going to have you didn't see the fancy intro graphic or anything. I'm just doing this like I did all my old Fatal Alliances videos by just doing a straight recording and then uploading that directly to YouTube. Hopefully that should mean we don't get any weird issues with Vassal and image problems, at least for this video. So the title of this video is going to be, or is, as you can read down below, the Island Hopping Campaign. And so I want to use this video as sort of a, I guess, continuation of the last video in terms of, why, again, demonstrating why having bases and operating your units near your bases make them more effective, and how that really applies to, say, like the Pacific War, where that ends up becoming much more important across the board. And before you get too excited, this is not the full Collector's Edition Vassal module. I am using, for the purposes of this video, the final edition, which was the previous edition of World in Flames. I'm using this Vassal module because it has all the fixins and the Pacific map. We do not currently have that for the Collector's Edition yet. The full Vassal module, still waiting on that. So whatever you see here in terms of the hexes and the positions of things may not reflect what's in the Collector's Edition. I know there are some major differences with the map, so don't look at what I show today as a one-to-one relationship to what you're going to see in the Collector's Edition map, but the mechanics and my descriptions are going to be good either way, no matter which version you're playing for the most part. So just bear with me as I go through the content here. So what I was trying to show in the last video was just the mechanism of the movement here. And, if we refer back to our charts for the movement and range, ships are going to be limited by their range no matter what, but their movement allowance is not. Now, I'm just, for demonstration purposes, showing this unit here, the Wyoming, and the Wasp, too, as a comparison of the different ratings, and that this particular ship is much faster than the Wyoming, though the Wyoming looks like it has kind of better attack power. So, at least for the purposes of this video, we won't worry too much about attack powers yet. We'll cover that in another video. But if these units were both stationed in Western Samoa, just to demonstrate kind of how far each of these guys can go, if they were just going out to the Polynesia Sea area, the Wyoming is going to spend one movement at one range getting out here, leaving port, and then spending the rest of its movement allowance, which would be 3, to get to the 3 box. And by comparison, the Wasp, if it's going to do that same action, would actually be able to go to the 4 box. Now, using one movement and one range to leave port, it would have 5 left over, but there is no 5 box, so this is as good as it gets. But this unit could then get out this far. Now, if we were to compare that to a sea zone that's farther away, if the Wyoming went to, say, the Solomons, it's going to use 1 and 1 to get out of port, and then another 1 and 1 to get to the sea zone, and then the leftover movement allowance is going to allow it to go into the 2 box. So not quite as good as it otherwise would have been. Now, for the Wasp, similarly, getting out here, it's still going to have 4 movement points left, which means it can sit in the 4 box. and this is going to allow it to be as effective as possible 1 C-zone away from its port of departure. And you can see, there could be cases in combat where only one set of units in a box will be involved. So it could be right now that only the Wyoming is going to be involved in a combat and not the Wasp, or vice versa, depending on how the search rolls pan out for a combat against enemy units. If I wanted them to be together, I could do that. I could say that the Wasp is only going to travel this far, and now they're together, which means greater strength as an inseparable stack of units, but we're giving up the Wasp's better ability to patrol. It kind of brings up another thing, a comment I had on the previous video. Somebody said they preferred, instead of the term patrol ability, to time at station or something along those lines, and that's good too. I mean, I guess no matter how it's interpreted, it doesn't matter if you consider it patrol ability, like I sort of ham-fistedly described it as, or more time on station within the C-zone you're talking about. The effect remains the same. The closer you are to the port that you left, the more effective you'll be in the area that you're at for the duration of the impulses or turns that they're there. Now, if we were to look at, just traveling to somewhere, again, this Wyoming ship could go 1-1 to get out to sea, 1-1 for 2, 1-1 for 3, and then 1-1 returning to another port. And let's just say, for the argument here, that Saipan is controlled by the Allies. They could then end up here, and that's a pretty fair distance. And again, that's all in a single impulse move. But by comparison, the Wasp, again, could go much farther. And they could even go, say, to here, and then to a port. And let's just say that Apari is Allied controlled again. And they could get all the way over here. And if you zoom out, or look at the entire map, depending on how you're looking at it, that's a pretty fair distance. You cross most of the map getting to port. But another thing that you can do is that when you've sent out your units, and again, let's say that we're at here, as we were before, when we get to the return to base phase of a turn, you don't have to send a unit back to the port that it came from. You can actually return it to base, to another base that you can control, or I should say another port that you control, as long as there's room for them. And so this might be a way that, you're going to move these units out of Western Samoa, you're going to move them somewhere else, but at least for the impulse or turn that you're busy with, you can have them be doing some actions and then go home to, say, well, let's see, let's just say Rabal. And they could do that. And returning to base that way is sort of reverse moving. You still have range and movement allowance that you can use to get back to base, as if you were starting movement over again. And so, technically that would mean the Wasp could even return to base farther away, assuming there aren't any other issues with interceptions and everything else. It just depends on, again, that range and movement allowance. And as a review, again, range I see as a rating of speed and fuel capacity, while movement allowance is really based on, is a better and more inclusive or all-encompassing rating of ship speed and maybe some maneuverability as well. So that's all I really wanted to show in that last video, that section that got messed up. Just that, you're going to be playing with the idea of ships getting to different sea boxes depending on how far they go, and sending them far away, they may be very much losing their efficiency, but you can use it to get to farther away ports for future action later. You can even move so far away. Let's just as a final bit on this. If the Wasp did 1-1 to get out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Using all of its range and movement allowance, it could end up in the 0 box. Now, the only problem with that is it's only really going to be useful there maybe to pick off convoys, because convoys can only be in the 0 box, especially if they're undefended. Maybe this unit could get them. But otherwise, this is sort of opening it up to being caught off guard by units that can more easily get to the 4 box. And say maybe there are some Japanese units that were stationed in a captured Singapore. Well, they're going to go and maybe they're going to head to, they're going to make it to the Bay of Bengal and then the Arabian Sea, maybe end up in the 2 or 3 box. That's going to put the ship in danger. So you want to be careful of that. Subs tend to be able to go farther out because they're really just aiming to hit some unprotected convoys if possible. But just something to keep in mind regarding that. So let's talk about the island hopping campaign in terms of naval positioning, and it's sort of a continuation on of the whole naval mechanics, because part of the naval mechanics that I guess would be common sense if you really think about it, but may not be if you're really too tunnel visioned focused on ships on the map, is that air units have a huge impact on naval matters in the game, and really, as it should be, but something you could forget, again, if you're worried too much about your Navy. So, in World in Flames, aircraft units can go out to sea the same way that a ship can go out to sea and do patrolling. Now, this is the case whether if you're just playing with naval units in the base game, or if you're playing the deluxe game, and you have, say, planes that are on aircraft carriers. Those aircraft carriers are going to have the planes on them pretty much all the time, but depending on what sea box they're in, that's going to impact where the planes can operate in, or how far away they can reach for land targets for something that those aircraft carrier planes are being used for. At least for the purposes of this video, we're going to focus really just on land-based air units, or air units that are going to be, contained on land, and not crazy deluxe edition stuff that's going to involve the carrier planes. But let's just look at, as an example, why capturing these ports along through these island chains, the island hopping campaign that happened historically, matter for attacking Japan as the Allies. So historically, what was important about the island hopping campaign that was performed was that ideally the Allies were looking for better bases to operate out of, closer to the home islands of Japan. And part of that was so that they could have proper air raiding, bombing campaigns. Now, planes can go pretty far in both real life and in the game, but fortunately the game, it manages to represent this sort of relationship that reflects history pretty well, in my opinion, and I'll show you kind of how that's going to work. So I ended up throwing out some example units out here just to sort of help set the stage, and for the purposes of this, let's pretend for a second that Kwajalein is controlled by the Allies who've successfully taken it. Don't worry too much about the land units here. I cloned them so they're the same. They're just meant to represent some land forces for the purposes of this video. And let's look at a B-29 strategic bomber unit. Now, obviously, these things are great. They're going to do strategic bombing. They're going to cause a lot of havoc. And if you've got an atomic bomb, you're going to use it in one of these guys probably to launch an atomic strike. Now, if we looked and said, okay, well, the U.S. has Wake Island in this example, and the range of a B-29A strategic bomber aircraft unit from the base game is 12. Now, you can double the range if you want to at the cost of having the bombardment factors that you're using, which would mean, at least if this plane's on Wake Island, it can actually get pretty darn far and could actually do some damage, or at least attempt to. But if it's going so far, this unit likely is not, especially if it's only coming from Wake Island, is not going to have a fighter escort, because most fighters aren't going to be able to travel 24 hexes. And even in the case where they are only going to travel 12 hexes, again, 12 is decently far. The Americans are not likely to have fighters that are going to go a distance of 12 to get to get to their target. Now, from Wake Island, if we counted the hexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, can't quite get to Tokyo anyhow, right? Now, they might get Iwo Jima, they might get Saipan, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, yeah, that's in range. But you're not going to be able to really get to Tokyo. And again, even with the 24 extended range, with the reduced effectiveness, you're going to get chewed apart by defending fighter interceptors. This is especially true because Wake Island, being just a normal hex here, the stacking limit for aircraft units is only 1. So this is the only unit, basically, fighter escorts is out of the question. So this isn't sufficient. Even if the U.S. starts with Wake Island and can hold Wake Island midway, the distance is too far, even for a B-29 bomber, to appropriately bomb areas that we would care about. So what it's going to require is us traversing the islands in the Pacific to get closer to Tokyo. Now, maybe to start with, if we were looking here, we might see that the Japanese have units here in the Caroline Islands. Maybe for the sake of the example, we'll also put them in Saipan, and sure, let's even say we put them into Guam. Now, what's likely going to be happening in a real game is that there are going to be tons and tons of Japanese naval units in the waters, but I've chosen not to represent them on the map for now because, again, we're just looking from a strategic standpoint what an island hopping campaign is going to look like. So part of what happened in history, as well as what can happen in the game, depending on how you're playing, is that units on an island are going to need supply. Now, as long as they have units in the sea zones around these islands, they're going to be in supply if you're playing just the base game. If you're playing with a special rule that is limited overseas supply, which means that units are only in supply as on a sea zone like this on islands if they have convoys in adjacent sea zones, then the convoys become very important, not just the navies that are nearby, but the convoys themselves. So either way, whether they're convoys or they're going to be allied, or same faction side ships, you do need to maintain some presence near the islands, or else these units are going to be out of supply and easier to be defeated, essentially, but also to basically reduce their effectiveness because they've got nothing else to do. And I guess what I mean by that is, historically, the Allies didn't take every single island on the way to Iwo Jima, for instance, or to get set up so that they could bomb the home islands. They bypassed islands by putting those islands out of supply. And if you're playing World in Flames, you're going to be able to do the exact same thing. So let's just start with, in a very rudimentary fashion, I'm just going to very quickly run through this. So first we have maybe unit comes out here. Maybe this is post some big fleet battle where the Japanese fleet has been crushed in many ways. And these ships come out here, and maybe they end up in the 4-box. They do, you're going to do a search roll for these when possible, and you're going to look to find enemy convoys. And what's really critical here is oops, I just have this extra one here, so let's throw it over there. So what's going to happen is, if this combat is successful and these all of these convoys are destroyed, I'll just delete them. That means that the units here in the Caroline Islands, assuming there's nothing in the Solomon Sea Zone, can't trace supply through here to get to Tokyo, which is ultimately, or a home city. They still can trace supply through the Bismarck Sea, which then goes to the China Sea back to Japan. But then once this unit, or an American fleet in the Bismarck Sea destroys the convoys or Japanese fleets in this sea zone, that now puts this island chain, or at least this the port of Truk, out of supply. Now that means that this unit, obviously with no other naval ships to transport it, it can't go anywhere. It can't attack anything. And if it happened to have any Japanese air forces here, they're going to be out of supply, and they're actually going to have a hard time doing much of anything because they can't get supply to continue going on air missions. Now they might try to rebase back over to one of these areas, but because, again, these areas now don't have supply, even these areas are going to be lacking supply, and the air forces aren't really going to make it there either. They're likely going to have to go all the way to Iwo Jima. And when you think about, in terms of the air power, if air forces have to relocate this far back, that's going to reduce their ability to project power. So if the Japanese have air forces here in the Caroline Islands, and because it's a major port, they can at least stack a few units of air here, they could be pushing power out to the Solomons, they could be going out to the Bismarck Sea, the Marianas. They can reach much farther, but if they're forced to go all the way back to Iwo Jima, that greatly decreases their area of effectiveness. It also means that, unless supply can be reestablished, even naval units are going to have a hard time operating out of Truk, if there are any available, like, say, a transport or an amphibious unit, or a beat-up battleship. I guess if it's not in the repair pool, it's going to be A-okay. But either way, if it's stuck here, depending on what options you're using for supply with the game, they could be in big trouble being out of supply here. Now, whether or not the Allies choose to take the Caroline Islands may depend on a couple of different factors. It may depend on where they want to station their next bit of forces. Now, because Truk is a major port, it is probably worth capturing, more so than maybe Panap here or even Guam. So, if the Allies do their whole thing, blah, 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 attack, boom, they eliminate this unit. Now, they have Truk, which means that if there were units down here in Western Samoa, they could transfer and base in Truk with the unlimited ship basing. That's going to make it useful. And then again, when these units return to base, they could return to base to the Caroline Islands, and when they are next moved, instead of going from Kwajalein and then moving to the intervening sea zone and ending up out here or over here, they're now able to move what is effectively one sea zone closer to where they might want to go, and so they're going to be more effective. They're going to be able to reach those boxes, higher sea boxes, more effectively the closer they are. Again, if we're aiming for Tokyo, they're now one sea zone of movement, more or less closer if you're going up this way. Maybe it's the same because both Kwajalein and the Caroline Islands are next to the Marianas. But again, it's just going to be a positional thing. What's a better route to take? Now, if we look and say, okay, well, let's say I've got the Caroline Islands. What am I looking at here? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Still can't quite make it. The Caroline Islands just not quite able to make it. But the nice thing is this unit can now hit areas around here, and it's more likely that the Americans are going to have fighter units that can either run cap or do escorting with this bomber since they're closer to their destination. So then the next objective might be Saipan. Now, between here and the home islands, the rest of these island areas are going to be, basically minimal port access. There's not going to be much in the way of ports, but again, having these areas that are closer is going to be important for aircraft stacking. So if we looked at Saipan, again, same story. We do some action here. We knock this unit out with some allotment of forces, and now we're in Saipan. What the Americans are probably doing is thus making sure that they've got units in these sea zones providing supply to the units. They're probably going to have convoys. If I wanted to get some convoys out here very quickly, I could just grab some. So convoy. And now again, this unit is still out of supply, and any Japanese aircraft here are going to want to get out of Dodge because they're out of supply. They're just going to end up face down if they end up here, and they'll never get out. So they're going to probably pull back to, again, Iwo Jima or somewhere else. And now Saipan, with the minor port here, you can stack a few aircraft units here. And again, the ships, if they wanted to, though a lower number of them could stack here because a minor port can't hold as many as a major port, can actually sit here. And again, we could be bypassing units that, if the Japanese player gets caught not fighting a good naval battle, you could end up with a bunch of units on these islands or these areas and now have no way to get them supply. And they're just being bypassed. Again, just like history, they're going to bypass them to get into range of the home islands from some better locations. So now that we're in the Mariana Islands, if we look again, not a huge gain for naval units in terms of range, but at least they're here. And then if we were looking at this B-29, again, let's do a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. 10, 11, 12. So once we're in Saipan, which had some famous battles there, at least this strategic bomber, who's got a pretty decent range, can actually hit these locations. Now, the only problem is they're probably still not going to have fighter cover to protect that bomber, and you can imagine that the Japanese are going to be doing their level best. Oh, that's not what I want. Delete those for a second. I just need to grab some fighter planes is what I'm really looking for. There we go. Excellent. Now this is actually a pretty good ranged fighter. So if this guy can go 8, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Maybe not quite enough. So we can't quite get these two guys together, an escorting fighter and a bomber, to bomb the home islands. So what do? Well, we need to keep island hopping, right? Unless we end up with some fighter that's even longer range. But another thing that you can consider doing is, again, fighters and bombers don't necessarily have to start in the same place. So if we have the B-29 here stationed here, this is another hex. You could actually stack one aircraft. If you can do this safely, then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can make that work. Now, the only problem is, again, unless you're going to have the force power to put, similar units all along the Marianas, you're still not going to quite have the total force strength that you're going to want. So, let's take Iwo Jima, right? We get our land units, and we knock out Iwo Jima. And we get into here. Okay. Now, our stacking is still limited. Our bomber's okay. Our bomber can actually get to where we want it. But the fighters, okay, here's a fighter. Let's just say we have another one, a very similar capability. Now, here's another one. So when you go to do this big bombing of Tokyo, you can now get multiple fighters, even if it's only one aircraft stacking per island, you can get multiple fighters in here within range, and the bombers, who may be stacked further back, can now approach as well. And this is how you're going to get the concentration of forces against Japan to do large-scale bombing campaigns. But again, you couldn't do that if you were way back here in Dutch Harbor or Honolulu or Western Samoa, or even the closer islands like Wake Island and Midway. So as you can capture and safely capture and build out your sort of bridge of supply and units up through the islands, you can get here. And ultimately, your ability to do that as the Allies is going to be reliant on beating the Japanese Navy. And you can imagine there's going to be some complex relationships of cruisers and subs and convoys and amphibious units and transport units and much, much more for how all of that's going to work out. Though I think for the purposes of this video, I think I've demonstrated kind of what I wanted to demonstrate. So the same thing for all of this in terms of getting to Tokyo for bombing purposes is the same if you're wanting to put these units, like these units here, out in the sea zones for patrolling. So I ended up deleting some of my naval bombers, but there's going to be a point where, let's see if I can grab a couple. There we go. So some of these naval bombers, you're going to want to have out here in the sea zones so they can attack naval units. So again, these operate on the same sort of logic that ships do, in that the closer you are from the base that they left, the more effective they'll be. So now their movement works a little bit different. The rulebook lays it out. It gets progressively more difficult to reach higher sea zone boxes. But because this movement's based on hex, they've worked out a little formula here. So you leave, you count 1 to a hex dot in the sea zone that you're trying to get to, and then depending on how much range you have left, it's going to dictate which of these boxes you end up in. And I'm trying to think. I think it's to get to the 1 box, it takes 1 more range. Then to the 2 box, it's either 2 more range or maybe it's 3 more range. It gets progressively more expensive. And of course, I don't have the rulebook open right this second, so I can't give you the exact numbers. Probably should have done that, but oh well. But the logic's the same, right? So a unit that's getting out of, say, Truk and is trying to get to the China Sea is going to be much more effective, likely, than, say, a unit that's now traveling from Kwajalein, because in this case, right, counting hexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is, I'll count that hex dot as being in the China Sea. 10, well, now I've only got 5 range left. I may only be able to get to the 2 or 3 box, depending on what the math works out to, right? If that's going from Truk, but by comparison, from Kwajalein would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Oh, we can, what are you going to end up in, the 0 box maybe? So it's the same sort of logic, right? You need to get to the hex dot of the sea zone, and then it's going to govern where you're at in the sea box. And so capturing ports, capturing locations to stage your aircraft closer to where you want them to operate will mean they'll be more effective in those areas of operation, in this case, all these sea zones. So I think that's all I wanted to cover in this video. This is about 35 minutes long, which is pretty long already. I want to try to keep these videos shorter than some of my other videos, which are quite long. Again, the point here is to point out kind of how a Pacific War is going to evolve in terms of capturing these ports and making it so that the ranges of your naval units and your air units will benefit you, and why it's important to make that steady advance where, again, trying to send something out of Honolulu across the ocean just simply is not going to work very well. And yeah, so there you go. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, hit the like button down below. If you'd like to see more videos like this, either for World in Flames or for any variety of war games, I try to cover more than just World in Flames. Hit the subscribe button. I try to put out videos as I can. It's been a little slow lately because I had been sick for a week, and I also had my internet service out broken basically for a week, and that caused a delay in getting this video out to you. I'll try to keep producing more and more as I go. If there's particular World in Flames topics that you'd like to see, put that in the comments section or send me a message or something. I will keep looking at Naval Mechanics, since that's probably one of the more complex parts of the game system. So probably next time we'll maybe look at actual naval combat and how that all works. But if there's, again, something that you have an interest in and you're not sure how it works, you'd like to see me cover it, let me know, and we'll go about it that way. So, again, thanks for watching. Take care.